My name is Jake Richards. I took a job out of desperation that now has me doubting my sanity. The best way to tell this story is to start from scratch. My life changed abruptly when I first met the man of peace, and then this other man, this tall man. It all started with me sitting depressed in my apartment. The economy was in crisis, and I was feeling the effects. I was now 52 years old and had been struggling with odd jobs for over 30 years. I didn't have any training. It had always worked well in the past, though. But in times like these, no one would hire an old guy with no training or special skills. I hadn't saved anything either. How could I? My salary was never really lavish, and then everyone wanted a piece of it. The state wanted taxes to finance its stupid wars. The health insurance company wanted a lot of money, and rents become more and more expensive in recent years. You can almost no longer afford to live. To cut a long story short, I was desperate. So I took some of my last dollars and got myself a dozen newspapers. It was hard to believe, but some companies only place their ads in newspapers and not on the websites of the job center, Zing or other providers. I guess they wanted to make sure that the applicant really made an effort and pulled out all the stops to get a job. It took me almost the whole day to read all the jobs from the newspapers and the internet and put them together in a Word file. In the end, I ended up with 124 ads to which I would now apply. Thank goodness almost all of them preferred an application by email. I couldn't have afforded to send 124 applications by mail. Now, my creativity was called for as I applied for a wide variety of jobs: gardening and landscaping helper, waiter, care assistant, office worker, cleaner, even dishwasher were just some of the jobs I tried to get. Luckily, I had taken a course in writing applications a few years ago and still had the sample applications and documents I created for myself on a USB memory stick, so I just had to adapt them to various job ads, and that's what I did for all 124 job offers. It took me almost 2 days, but in the end, I was proud of my work and was sure that it would lead me to success. So I sent off all the emails and letters and waited for positive news. Now, in the meantime, my situation became more and more complicated. My landlord came by for a visit and told me that due to the economic crisis, he now always needed the rent on the first of the month and could no longer grant me any deferrals or wait time. I couldn't blame him. It was clear that he was dependent on the money himself, and on top of that, my account was seized because I hadn't paid an invoice for $239 for a rental car and had ignored the reminders. But that didn't matter. With my new job, I could easily pay $240 and my account would no longer have been seized. It took more than a few days before the first rejection arrived. It wasn't motivating, but it was part of the job. I knew that. Then I received another rejection by email. And another. After 4 weeks, I had 103 rejections. The remaining companies didn't even bother to get back to me, and when I asked, I was told they'd chosen someone else. That couldn't be right. I made no demands on my new job. I didn't care about the hours. I didn't even care about the pay as long as I could pay my bills. I just wanted to fucking live. Out of sheer anger, I crumpled up the newspapers and was about to throw them all away when something caught my eye. It was a smiley face I had drawn in highlighter next to an advertisement. It was one of the few I hadn't applied for. To be honest, I didn't even take it seriously and just smiled about it. I read it again, though, now to decide whether I should apply after all. The text of the ad read as follows. Heidewitzka, watch out. Are you ready to travel, even to another world? Can you do simple tasks and maintain discretion? Then you work for hell. With us, it's warmer than in heaven. Applications by email to mandisfriedensen69@gmail.com. Maybe it was all just clever marketing, right? It certainly wasn't the devil himself who was looking for reinforcements in hell. It could be that this company made ovens or something similar. I should just send an email with a short application and see what's happening. The very next morning, I had a reply in my inbox, and it was one that made me damn happy. Your passionate application enchants my soul, Mr. Richards. I would like to invite you for an interview. 3 hours after you read this email, come to 41 Blaker Street, room 66 on the 4th floor. It will be worth your while. Even though the first part of the text was certainly meant sarcastically, I was incredibly happy to even have finally been invited for an interview. I wondered how the person would know when I read the email, though, but I didn't care. Immediately after reading the good news, I ironed my best suit and took a long shower. I had neglected showering in the last few weeks, but that was over now. New job, new me. Then I set off straight away. I didn't want to be late. Blaker Street was about a 20-minute walk from me, which would definitely be a pleasant commute. The whole area looked even more run down than the street I lived on, I thought to myself. Old apartment buildings that were empty and sprayed with graffiti, warehouses and bus stops that were probably no longer used. When I arrived in front of 41, I had to pull myself together. All hope suddenly disappeared from my heart as I was standing in front of an abandoned factory building. Apparently, someone had played a joke on me. As if in a trance, I still walked through the front doors and the front entrance, although it really didn't have doors anymore. I didn't know what else to do. So I climbed the stairs to the 4th floor and thought to myself that maybe I could throw myself off the roof and the whole misery would be over. Wouldn't hurt to visit 66 again first. The corridor on the 4th floor was filthy, full of syringes, puke, and garbage. Room 66 was the only one that was closed with a metal door. A large X was scratched into the floor in front of the door, and it said, "Knock here." Was someone from HR supposed to be here after all? Maybe they wanted to reopen the factory. That would create a lot of jobs, and not just for me. But without too much hope, I knocked and was surprised at the noise I made. It didn't sound as if I was knocking on a metal door, but on wood. "Come in." Somehow I got dizzy or something. I felt like I was falling forward and stumbled. When I looked up again, I was actually standing in an office. Only it didn't look like a factory. The walls were made of bare stone. There were tapestries, old paintings, and a big old desk with a burning candle on it. The man sitting at the desk put down his smartphone and stood up. "Mr. Richards, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please take a seat," he said. The man had black, back-combed hair and piercing green eyes. He was wearing blue jeans and a black shirt. He had a badge on his chest with that smiley face on it that said Team Peace. Maybe he was an environmental activist or something. Anyway, I sat down and was curious to see what kind of job he had to offer. "I see you've admired my badge, Mr. Richards. If you work for us, you'll get your own, of course. Peace is our business, you know." "How do you achieve peace, you ask?" "With progress." "How do you achieve progress?" "With science. We have made such progress with our scientific experiments over the last 100 years that we now have to move to a larger test facility. In such a large test facility, there's a lot of work involved that has to be done in addition to the experiments. Waste has to be disposed of. The facility has to become clean. Light bulbs have to be changed and the like. To make a long story short, Mr. Richards, we need a janitor," he said. "So, a janitor job. That sounded good." He told me more about the work and that I would have to get used to the fact that things work differently than in other companies there. I didn't know what he meant by that, but it certainly wouldn't be a problem for me. So he gave me the contract, which I was supposed to read at home. If I accepted the offer, I was to contact him by email the next day and could start working the following day. Damn, that sounded good. When we said goodbye, I asked him what his name was, and he said names weren't that important. He was simply the man of peace. It took a bit of getting used to, but that shouldn't be a problem. As I left the room, I felt like I was falling again and got dizzy. When I turned around, the metal door was locked, and something strange was happening here. But I could live with that because the man of peace, he seemed nice. Later that evening, I read the contract and almost spit my coffee on it when I saw the salary. It said $4,000 a month in advance with the possibility of payment in gold or diamonds. $4,000 in advance? I'd scrub the torture chamber of hell for $4,000. The rest of the contract was a bit strangely worded, but it was actually a very ordinary employment contract. Only on the last page was something relatively unusual. It said, "The safety and integrity of your body and your immortal soul is only guaranteed if you adhere to the following rules. 1. Do not talk to the test subjects. 2. Never let a test subject out of his room. 3. Be punctual as far as possible. 4. Be discreet and do not talk to anyone about your work. 5. Be friendly and greet other employees. Hail Lucifer." Hail Lucifer? Not with the test objects to speak? Were they experimenting on people? Well, it was possible that it was a medical study with volunteers who were well paid. I quickly forgot my doubts because this figure was still buzzing around in my head, $4,000. Actually, there was no question about it. I would sign. The next morning, I wrote another email to mandisfriendison69@gmail.com saying I'd accept and that I was looking forward to my first day at work tomorrow. Just a few seconds later, I received a reply. The man could really type fast, it seemed. The email said, "Welcome to Team Peace, Mr. Richards. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Please join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. local time in your world in room 69 in the 4th floor of the building, on Bleecker Street. We look forward to seeing you." 9 a.m. was perfect, so I could sleep in. Freshly showered, shaved, and full of energy, I stood in front of room number 69 at 10 to 9 the next day. There was also an X carved on the floor. On the door, it said, "Employees only." Then I was in the right place. I tried to open it, but it was locked. Confused, I knocked and had to wait almost a half a minute for an answer. However, the voice didn't sound like the man of peace, but like that of a little boy. I felt dizzy again and fell forward. This time I was sure that the door hadn't opened, and yet I was now standing in the middle of the room. In front of me stood a little boy. He greeted me and introduced himself as Lucas. He was the junior vice president of operations and would be briefing me today. First, I got my Team Peace badge and was told that the Team Peace t-shirts, one of which he was wearing, were unfortunately not being delivered at the moment. Then came the best part. I got the $4,000 cash in hand, paid in advance. My hands were shaking while Lucas showed me my locker where I could leave my money and put on my work clothes. After I'd slipped into my overalls, I realized that this wasn't actually possible here. I had gone into a room that could only be, 20 by 20 at most. There should have been air behind the back wall of the room because that's where the building ended, but it didn't. There was a door that led into the testing facility. There were several long corridors with rooms or cells behind them, and there was something else. If you looked out the window, you could see that you were on the first floor. But until then, just now, we were still on the 4th floor. How was that possible? We hadn't walked up any stairs or taken an elevator. What's more, the sun outside was a reddish orange and a little darker than it had been minutes ago. I didn't have time to think about it, though, because Lucas showed me around and listed my tasks: mopping the floor of the corridors, cleaning the empty cells, taking out the garbage, changing any light bulbs, and cleaning the office of the man of peace. This was at the end of the long corridors. We visited him briefly, but he was on the phone. In the corner of the room, someone else was standing there. It was a huge, muscular guy with pale skin. He was wearing a nurse's outfit and had a paper bag over his head. I remembered the rules from the contract and greeted him. The muscle man raised his hand and nodded to me, or so it seemed. When we went out again, Lucas introduced him to me as Festus. He was the head nurse here and a valued member of staff. Then he showed me the toilets, which of course needed to be cleaned. When I said that the building was bigger than I had imagined, Lucas told me that they had previously worked in the neighborhood where Festus came from, but there had been too much trouble with the authorities. This would be a much quieter place to work. I didn't even want to know which neighborhood Festus came from, so I decided just to get to work. The corridors were easy to clean with the excellent equipment I had at my disposal. I even had a lot of fun doing it. I also cleaned the office of the man of peace thoroughly. At first, I wanted to come back later because he was on the phone again, but he said that wasn't a problem. He really seemed to trust me, which was a nice feeling. I don't know who he was talking to on the phone, but the conversation, it didn't make sense to me. It was about people in a place called Tarusa, a man called Belal, and a lot of other crazy stuff. So my first day at work went relatively well, and I went home happy with $4,000. If I followed Lucas's instructions to go back out the door I'd come from, I'd end up back on the 4th floor hallway at 41 Blaker Street. I realized by now that the whole thing wasn't normal, but I didn't care at all. With the $4,000 in my hand, I went straight to my landlord and paid the rent for the coming month. Then I ordered Chinese food and some clothes from Amazon. Life immediately felt much better. Little did I know that everything would be taking a dark turn. The Mothman. By the next day, I'd gotten used to the strange transitions, but I didn't want to think about the fact that I was in a different world. Sometimes it's better to just get on with things without worrying too much. I cleaned the corridors and took out the garbage, and when I did that, I also got the confirmation that I wasn't really in Blaker Street anymore because the terrain outside was completely different. We were on a kind of a small mountain, cut off from the rest of the world. I ignored that too, and carried on with my work. While cleaning one of the last corridors, I noticed some strange noises coming from one of the rooms. It sounded like a whirring. I couldn't describe it exactly. Anyway, my curiosity got the better of me, and I looked through the small barred window by the door. It was dark in the cell. In one corner, I saw a bed and a wash basin. In the other corner, there was something hanging on the wall. At first, I thought it was just a strange cupboard, but then my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I was startled. Hanging on the wall was a huge moth. The monster was easily as big as a full-grown man. Then I saw why it was so big. The moth was wearing boxer shorts. It was as big as a full-grown man because it was actually a man. The legs still looked human, as did parts of the head, but the back was covered with a kind of fur and had huge moth wings. One half of the face was human, the other half looked like an insect, including a huge insect eye. What a gruesome sight. The moth suddenly turned to me and then flew toward the door. I was startled again, fell onto the seat of my pants. Festus, who I hadn't even noticed, tapped me on the shoulder and gave me a thumbs up. As weird as that sounded, it helped me to process the horror I had just seen. What had happened to this man? Was he so bad and they tried to cure him, or was he one of the man of peace's experiments? The fate of the Mothman preoccupied me for the next few days. I'd taken this job without asking questions about what kind of experiments were going on here. Did that make me a bad person? Even an accomplice? I didn't know. I didn't even know whether the experiments were harming the test subjects or whether they had volunteered. Honestly, it was none of my business. I was only the janitor. I mean, the military also needed a janitor, so was he responsible for millions of people dying in wars? I didn't think he was. Then there was the point that I had no choice with this job. I was finally somebody again. I had enough money to support myself, to dress nicely, to go out and eat, and buy myself a small car. Without this job, I was broke and on the verge of taking my own life. I felt I had the right to my life and decided to just work hard and stay out of the other things. And that's what I did. About a week later, the Mothman's cell was empty, and I had to clean it. It smelled pretty disgusting in there. The floor in the middle of the room, directly under the lamp, looked burnt, and there were some remains stuck there. Apparently, the moth had gone up in flames. Lucas gave me the task of driving down to the city and ordering 100 fireproof blankets. Apparently, the Mothman had lit a fire with the help of his blanket and sparks. Moths were addicted to light. I had terrible nightmares at night, and of course I was aware of where they came from. Without realizing it, I had plunged into a dark world of horror and unimaginable horror, and had accepted it as my normality. The Mothman had committed suicide and was now history. But he was only the beginning. The dead woman. Over the next few days, I got more and more used to my new job and also to the people. The Man of Peace and Festus were particularly nice. Lucas was nice too, but somehow I didn't quite trust him. While cleaning the office, the Man of Peace phoned again.
Listen, decent work takes time. We're the best you've got. What's your great lab doing on Haven's Rock? They're not even scratching the surface. We're the ones who'll provide you with an army like no other soon enough. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's all right. No problem. I'll see you around.
So that's what this was all about. They wanted to breed an army. I told myself it was a similar program to Captain America's Super Soldier program. Deep down, I knew that wasn't true, but it worked for me. I had just decided to go for the money. After all, my conscience didn't pay the bills. Normally, I stayed away from the cells, except for the ones I had to clean, of course. But one cell caught my attention. I heard a moan as I walked past. Woman moaning. Sexy. It sounded like a woman moaning. What can I say? I was a very simple man. I just wanted to take a look inside and see what was going on. Like a moth to a flame, I looked through the small window with the bars, and I immediately realized that the woman had not moaned out of lust. A large piece of metal, probably part of a car, was stuck deep into her chest. When she saw me, she moaned again and jumped toward the door. Moaning zombie. I took a step back, but this gave me a better view of the woman. Her skin was pale and her eyes white. The blood from the large wound in her chest had long since clotted. I took a look at her file next to the door. It wasn't forbidden, otherwise it wouldn't have been in my contract. The woman's name was Louisa Gringer. There was also an official report from the New York Police Department. The woman had been in a car accident with a drunk guy. Her heart was pierced by a piece of metal. The woman was dead. That could also be seen in the pictures of her lying in the morgue. How could it be that this dead woman was now standing in front of me, pacing around her cell and moaning? Had the Man of Peace really found a cure for death? That was sensational. What a breakthrough in medicine. Over the next few days, I kept glancing into her cell and changed my mind. And changed my opinion quickly. She sometimes walked against the worn and gaze and showed there was still some kind of intelligence in her, but she couldn't understand her own existence. What a terrible way to eke out a life. I wondered if she could feel pain. If so, it had to be unbearable. Her body was half rotten, her blood was clotting in her veins, and that piece of metal was still stuck in her heart. I could no longer help the poor thing. But maybe her neighbor. He was new in the cell, and I heard him crying. It sounded like he was just a little boy. I knew I was breaking the rules, but I couldn't help it. After all, it was a child. I couldn't see into the cell because there was a towel hanging outside the window, but the boy answered when I called him. He pleaded. I didn't even ask for help. I just asked what he wanted. I said, I just wanted to know if it was okay. Was there no place for this little boy? What he said now shocked me. He was no longer a little boy. He was much older than me, and if I wanted to keep my life, I should stay away from him and his brother. When I asked him who his brother was, he told me it was Lucas. I knew there was something wrong with him. The next day, I went to the man of peace and confessed. I'd hoped he wouldn't fire me. He calmly explained to me that Noah, the boy's name, was not a simple test subject after all. He was part of the family and a guest, but that didn't apply to the other cells. I assured him that I would stick to it and made my way to the cellar. I'd never been there before, but once in the cellar, I was supposed to mop the floor there. On the way, I passed Noah's cell, and instead of a cry, all I heard was a terrifying growl. In the basement, there was a single cell next to several generators and pipes. Unlike the others, the door was locked with several chains, and some strange signs were painted around it. I wondered if they were there to keep the prisoner inside. I wanted to concentrate on my work, but then I heard something. Playbox. Playbox? It sounded like a melody from one of those old speakers, but where did it come from? It had sounded as if the melody had come from directly behind me, but that wasn't possible. I was startled again because I heard something. Little girl laugh. The laughter came from the cell and was clearly coming from a little girl. He had caught more children here? The money was all well and good, but I just couldn't ignore experiments on children. I went to the cell door and asked the little girl if she was okay. After all, I felt kind of funny. It wasn't until I was back upstairs on the first floor that I really came to. Maybe I had inhaled some toxic stuff. Dazed, I went home after my shift. I took a hot shower and sat down in front of my new flat-screen TV. However, I didn't get around to switching it on because the storm suddenly cut the power out. I was frantically searching for my cell phone in the dark when I heard the little girl's laughter again. Damn. There must have been a good reason why you shouldn't talk to the test subjects. Then I heard another scary noise. It was coming from my bathroom. Singing. It sounded like someone was singing in there. I plucked up all my courage and headed to the bathroom door. At least I had some light with my cell phone. I pushed the door open with a jolt, but there was no one to be seen. However, there was water in the bathtub, as if someone had taken a bath. I wanted to pull the plug, but it didn't happen. It was too late. I saw her in the water, a ghostly woman with black eyes. It was the used Festus who grabbed me by the shoulder and pulled me away from her. It turned out that a ghost who was in the service of the man of peace had followed me home. Lucas and Festus had locked him up again, and I had to attend a training session and assure them that I would take better care of myself in the future. I can assure you that I did, but it didn't help much. The ghost was not going to be the darkest creature I would encounter in that basement. A few weeks later, I was mopping the basement again when I noticed a room that was open. I thought it might be a cell that wasn't being used at that moment, so I went in to clean it. I was wrong. The cell was in use. In its center was a table or altar made of stone. A man was lying on it. A tall man. He looked old and wore a suit smeared with dirt. It looked as if someone had dug up a corpse and laid it out here. That was quite possible, considering the experiments the man of peace was conducting. Somehow, though, it seemed to me that this tall man had some kind of aura? A cold, evil aura. He was different from the walking corpses I had seen so far. I didn't want to have anything to do with him, and I wanted to keep the agreement I had made with the man of peace. As I was about to open the door again to go out, I heard something. It was a kind of whisper. Was it coming from the dead tall man? Then perhaps the experiment had already begun. I looked behind me, but I couldn't see any movement from the big man. He lay rigidly on his altar, his dead eyes fixed on the ceiling. but I was sure that he had whispered. Maybe not with my mouth, but somehow his words had gotten into my head. I heard them again. Hunger. Hunger. I ran out of the room and slammed the door behind me. You would have thought it was an undead that just wanted to eat some brains, but somehow I knew it wasn't. He was something else. I had to tell the man of peace about it. So I went into his office and entered after knocking. Mr. Richards, how's the work going? Asked the man of peace. Wonderful, sir, wonderful. I just wanted to let you know that I've come across something in the cellar again, and after the debacle last time, I wanted to let you know right away. Very good, Mr. Richards. That's exactly what I expect from you. What's been going on? Has Itia, our water spirit, been bothering you again? He asked. No, sir. As you probably know, there's a man lying on a stone table, some tall man. I went in because the door was open and I was mopping up and I saw him. I don't know if their experiments have started yet. Experiments? Mr. Richards, this isn't just some big man. It's one of the tall men, one of the first creatures of creation. While God created the archangels, someone else created the tall men. You go ahead and mop the room, but don't touch the big man. He is very valuable to our operation. Of course not, sir. I wouldn't touch him voluntarily, but I wanted to tell you that he spoke to me in my head. He said he was hungry, and before something like what happened last time, I thought... The man of peace stood up from his desk. He seemed genuinely surprised. He told you he was hungry. Mr. Richards, that's fantastic. We've been waiting a long time for him to wake up. I found him a little over 1,000 years ago, locked up and buried in a coffin. That was a punishment for the crimes against nature committed by him and the other tall men. The tall men are very important to the princes of hell. Only they can complete an important task that must be done to usher in the apocalypse. His awakening is extremely good news. Well, it's good news for me, but not for them. He has chosen her to help him. He wants to regain his strength. You have to feed him. That can be very unpleasant, but I'm afraid they have no choice. If they don't feed him, he will eat them, and I won't be able to help them. I was dreading what I would have to feed the big man. What was that crime against nature the big men committed, sir? Did they kill anyone? I asked. Yes, Mr. Richards. You killed God. My small human brain did not understand the biblical implications of this monstrous crime. I had to concentrate on my new task now anyway. It was time to feed the big man. Hey, horror fans, do you want to learn more about the Man of Peace and his experiments? Then click here and subscribe to our channel. All stories on the channel are connected and tell one large story.